Welcome, everyone. We are so happy to have you all here. Welcome. So glad you could join us for this session. I see there are still folks joining us, so come right in. We are so excited to have you here with us. For everyone that was able to join us last night, welcome back. And to you who are joining us for the first time, we are so glad to have you. I am Lashina Jenkins, and my role here at Faith in Place is the Northern Illinois Outreach Coordinator. I'm joining today from Highwood, Illinois, and would love to hear where you're from in the chat. So please go ahead and type it into the chat. Where are you joining us from? They're coming. I see you chatting. There it is. Gurney, Evanston, Deerfield, Marion, welcome. Waukegan in the building. South Carolina, let's go. Oh, the mountains. Yes, we do have the mountains on display. Libertyville, welcome. Rockford. Thank you all so much for participating. As I sit here welcoming you, I am also welcoming this history of the land I am on. I thank this land and all of the beings within it, upon it, and above it. This land supports us to stand with one another. This land gives us air to breathe and water to drink. This land feeds many beings, including us and others in our human family. This land gives beauty that feeds our spirits. We thank this land for giving life. I thank the ancestors of this land, both human and more than human, everyone who has ever loved this land. I thank you. I don't know the whole story of this land and of the people and other beings who have lived and died here, but I want to thank the centuries of care and cultivation this land experienced through the Native peoples who lived, cared for, and cultivated this land before being forcibly removed, including the Ottawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi peoples. As we work to be more inclusive in our environmental work, we recognize the many ways our practices, language, and mindset have excluded the original caretakers of this land, and are committed to shifting our perspectives and way of working to be more inclusive. I also want to take a moment to thank the donors and sponsors that made this event possible, allowing us to welcome inspiring speakers like the three guests we will listen to in just a moment. Our sponsors for our session today include the Green Team Summit lead sponsor, Presbytery of Chicago, our sponsor of the day, Illinois Environmental Council, and our session sponsor, ComEd. We also want to thank our Oak Level sponsors, Kollel Jewish Renewal Center, Citizens Utility Board, Climate Reality, and Collective Resource. Our thanks to the generosity of each of you making this possible. Before turning the floor over to Elena, who will introduce our discussion today and the panelists we will be learning from, I want to offer a breathing practice. I invite you to find a comfortable position in your seat and to rest your eyelids. What will follow, if you are able, is 3 big corporate breaths together. However, I want you to feel comfortable breathing at whatever pace feels most life-giving for you and your body. Feel free to cut off your camera for these few moments. If you are able, while seated or standing where you are, I encourage you to align your vertebrae one on top of the other, from the back of your skull down to your pelvic floor. If that is not possible, please focus your attention on the path of your breath as it inflates, then deflates your chest. Now take in a deep breath. If your body will allow, hold that breath and make note of any aches or stiffness in your muscles, taking in all that is demanding your attention and energy, and then slowly exhale. Release the emotions that might be held in your toes, abdomen, or the worry resting in your neck, your shoulders, or your back. Give your muscles permission to release that tension. Release it all in this slower than usual exhale. Allow your body to feel loose and heavy as the air travels out of your lungs. These next couple breaths are for you. Use each breath to inflate your chest with power. Feel each breath delivering love to every cell of your body as you exhale. If you are able, feel your feet grounded on the surface upon which they sit. Give your head a gentle roll to stretch your neck. Breathe into the stretch. Let us offer gratitude for our body just as it is, for the ways it has supported us throughout today and the ways it is supporting us in this very moment. Now, when you're ready, open your eyes with gratitude for the thriving faith communities represented on the screen. It's so good to see you, and we are grateful for your being present with us. Thank you. And now I will turn the floor over to Elena.
Thanks, Lashina. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon if you are further east than I am. To those of you I haven't met, I am Elena, Faith and Places Deputy Director, and I am so grateful each of you could be with us this morning. I am really looking forward to today's session to explore our summit's theme of interwoven, inclusive, and intersectional, a multi-faith response to our eco-crises. And I'm just very excited for the ways that our discussion will kind of explore this theme and invite us into new ways of being. I am joining you this morning from my apartment in Chicago, which is sitting on land and near water close to where Lashina is calling in from. And also welcomed the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa peoples, among many other Native peoples, including the Miami, the Ho-Chunk, the Menominee, Sauk, Fox, Kickapoo, and Illinois nations for centuries before contact with Europeans. And today is still home for around 35,000 Native peoples. The way I understand the land I am calling in from today and I'm from originally, and the way many of us understand the history of the land we are calling in from, is in part inherited from our families, our communities, and the history that they hold with the land or the stories they tell about it. And in part, it's what we learn as we expand and grow our own understanding of the world. Part of the journey of building our intersectional, inclusive response as a multi-faith community includes building our awareness around the ways we are moving through the world, recognizing the stories we inherited and the ways of being we see modeled. Today, we will be spending some time reflecting on the frameworks and traditions we rely on to understand our place in the universe and the ways we relate to one another and the earth. A quote I think about frequently is by the author Annie Dillard, who says, "We must somehow take a wider view, look at the whole landscape, really see it, and describe what's going on here. Then we at least tell the right question into the swirling band of darkness, or if it comes to that, acquire the proper praise." The panelists whom I will introduce in just a moment have each helped me take that wider view, understanding belonging and my relationship to the land in a deeper way. I am grateful for the ways that their work has woven into the core of my approach to environmental work, and on a more personal note, in the way I understand belonging while living in a culture that is often built to exclude me. I grew up as a trans, queer, Latinx kid in the South, in Tennessee, where there was very little representation of any of my identities around me. And the stories I were told were not inclusive. And I didn't have a sense of belonging or connectedness to my own identity, or how my story wove into the story of the earth and the lands and the water around me. And in different ways, each of the panelists here today have been such an important part of my own journey to meet that yearning. And I feel a sense of personal gratitude for their work, and am just really excited that will be able to share that with you as well. I hope today's panel will be a source of deepening and grounding for you as we explore ways that Eurocentric perspectives are often the voices we hear framing the ecological crises we're in, and also the voices we hear sharing solutions. But we've seen that it's often done without much success. So we will be invited to deepen our awareness of the ways the sciences and techniques of cultures that have been ignored, marginalized, and denigrated will invite us to see pathways that not only invite justice and decency, but also generate workable solutions. So to lead this discussion, I am honored to bring to the stage our panelists. I will introduce each of them and they will have a word before we dive into our questions to welcome you as the audience. And then also after our panel, we're going to have a Q&A. So as they're sharing, feel free to chat questions and we will get to as many questions as we can after the panel discussion. So our first panelist is Dr. Lyla June Johnston. Lyla is an Indigenous musician, author, and community organizer of Dene, Cheyenne, and European lineages. Her multi-genre presentation style has engaged global audience towards personal, collective, and ecological healing. Her doctoral research focused on the ways in which pre-colonial Indigenous nations shaped large regions of Turtle Island, aka the Americas, to produce abundant food systems for humans and non-humans. And side note, if you're interested in reading Lyla's dissertation, it will be linked on our resource page along with other resources, including her music and a TED Talk that she created. Our second panelist is Dekila Chungyalpa. And Dekila is the founding director of the Loka Initiative, an award-winning platform at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So close by for our Faith and Place friends, for faith leaders and culture keepers of Indigenous traditions working on environmental and climate issues. She is an experienced environmental program director with over 2 decades of experience in designing and implementing global conversation and climate strategies. Dekila is originally from the Himalayan state of Sikkim in India and is an Bhutia origin. And our third panelist is Dr. Yuria Celidwen. Yuria is of Indigenous Nahua and Maya descent from the highlands of Chiapas, Mexico. Her scholarship centers on Indigenous forms of contemplation, examining self-transcendence and its embodiment and pro-social behavior like belonging, planetary flourishing, ethics, compassion, awe, love, and sacredness. She calls this work of the Indigenous ethics of belonging, rooted in honoring life. And you can learn more about the experience and work of all 3 of our panelists through the session resource link, which we will share after our panel, including a QR code that you can scan to access those resources on your phone. And then after the session, we'll also add the recording of this session. With that, I offer welcome to each of you, our panelists. And before we dive into our questions, I would love to give each of you a moment to greet our audience. And if you would like to share where you're joining from and maybe what's on your heart as you are entering this space, you are most welcome. So I will start with Dekila.
Happy World Indigenous Day, everyone. What is on my mind right now very much is my home region. I come from Sikkim in the Northeast Himalayas. It is wedged right under Tibet and in between Nepal and Bhutan, for those of you who might know the region. In October, we had a terrible flash flood, so we're still in the recovery mode from this major disaster, which is climate caused, and climate change being one of those issues that's really hard to aggregate the exact cause, right? It's one of those things where there isn't necessarily someone you can point to and say, hey, you did this, therefore it caused this. There is this real sense of helplessness for communities that are having to adapt to the impacts of climate change, but they had no hand in causing it. And then the other issue that has really made the impacts of climate change worse for us is hydropower dams. So my region, Sikkim, is tiny. It's the size of Rhode Island. We have one major river that goes through it, and we have 28 dams that are planned on that river, massive hydropower structures that are designed and built against the wishes and protests of all the indigenous people of my land. Literally 3 decades of protests. And so for me, when I sit here, one of the things I'm thinking about is, you know, it's really easy to talk about the legacy of colonialism and therefore imply that colonialism is dead and it happened 400 years ago. But the reality for me is that it's alive and kicking, and that it has just transformed into neoliberalism, right? And the fact that we have convinced all of the world that human development equals to the dispossession of indigenous lands and the disregard of indigenous people's desires and wishes, right? And then the transformation of a system that was really community-based into a system that extracts and exploits resources and benefits the global elite. And I say global elite because it's not as if the problem is just the global north. We have plenty of elites in the global south that are benefiting hugely from this form of colonialism. And so all of this is on my heart today. I thank you, Elena, for bringing the 3 of us together. We're all loved with one another. We have a great deal of love among the 3 of us. So I'm just really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will pass it to Dr. Celidwen.
Lektalishe, Bameayesh, Bintia Willalik, Wokal Awalik, you untelabad behunt, Copet, you untetalishe. What you just heard is my indigenous Maya Tzeltal language. I'm welcoming you into this space and grateful for your attention. And with that language, I'm also honoring my ancestors of lands, of the Nahuatl Tlaxcalteca and Ñañu Otomi on my mother's side, and Maya Cachiquel, Mam, Mocho, and Tzeltal on my father's side. And I honor also our ancestors of lands, of waters, of skies, ancestors that are orienting from the past our action in the present moment to really then create a future that is intentional and caring. And I honor as well the lands where I'm speaking of today, of the Ramaytush, Nowekma, Ohlone tribes of the San Francisco Bay Area, although my home at the moment is the Wichun Ohlone territory of so-called Berkeley. I honor the legacies of our relatives around the world who have been displaced of lands, and all of our other than human communities that also have to leave their lands because of human impact. And also, as I am speaking my indigenous language, which is a statement of presence, of resilience, of power, of wisdom and tradition that continues to this day, I also bring the realities of us meeting right now during Indigenous Peoples' Day, that just last Friday was recognized as an Indigenous Peoples' Day for the first time in the US. 2 years ago, it was issued as a proclamation, and last Friday was again proclaimed as the day. And legislation is being considered to really make it a federal day, moving out from Columbus Day. And I say this because when I was a child, I was told to keep our language private and to speak it only at home, because speaking it in public could result in actions of wounding and discrimination. We had to keep our language as a wisdom that had to be targeted as wounds. So reclaiming that language, knowing that we lose an indigenous language every 2 weeks, is a way of being present and knowing that the pride of identity changes the way that we perceive the world. By naming, we create realities. By naming, we acknowledge, we honor, we give space. So that's what I have in my heart right now. I want to give space. I want to give voice. I want to name. I want to acknowledge. I want to give my presence as a way of reverencing the presence of all these relatives that we are naming, that are finding their way back home.
I'll turn it over to you now.
Greetings, my kin and my family and my people. Honored to be here. Lyla June Yanishye. My name's Lyla June. Aro nanisht ejet kachi inishlandon cestus. Natlan in Bashishin Ashin de Shichedo Bilagana Edishanale. Taos, New Mexico, Dane Nashan. Gallup, New Mexico, Sugarrun. Akwit Egot and Astranishna. My name's Lyla June, coming from the Nanisht Ejit clan of the Diné Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. Zooming in from the lands of the Tunkis and Massacoes peoples, colonially known as Simsbury, Connecticut. I just gave a speech this morning to a bunch of beautiful kids at Westminster Private School for Indigenous Peoples Day. So that's something to celebrate. These beautiful young people got a big download today. And they're very beautiful and they ask beautiful questions and they're on board. I have faith in the next generation to meet this moment with a lot of love and beauty. What's on my mind today is how each of us are imbued with divine purpose, on a personal level, on a cultural level, and on a species level. Personal level, because each and every one of us was born here for a reason. Cultural, because each and every one of us has a role to play in the healing of the cultural divisions. And our ancestry is perfect for us to do what we came here to do, to play our part, to heal things. And in terms of species, our divine purpose is to serve our Mother Earth. And we were designed actually perfectly to do that, believe it or not. We have the perfect hardware, we just are missing the software. We call a virus in our programming. And if we could just bring back that software that talks about reciprocity, reverence, responsibility, respect, we actually would be a great asset to the earth. And our population numbers would actually be a good thing rather than a bad thing, because you'd have more and more people giving to the land. That's what I'm thinking about. Thank you, Elena, for gathering us.
Thank you, Lyla. Our first question, we're getting many thumbs up to missing the sock, Lyla. I think a lot of people are resonating with that. So our first question is for each of you, and I feel like in your words of welcome, you touched on this in different ways, but if you would like to add to it and build out, and Dekila, I'll start with you. So for each of you, how does your community tend to view their role as caretakers of the earth or in relationship with the earth? And how does this differ from the mainstream environmentalism that we may, hear the voice of loudly and the culture of within the United States, but also globally?
Thank you, Elena. I love that, Lyla. Just a little cackling. So I suppose, in a way, this is also the reason why I left mainstream environmentalism and started working with faith leaders and culture keepers of indigenous traditions, because the fundamental issue I had has to do with the way I was brought up and the values that were instilled in me since I can remember. And the first one of those is that the earth is alive, right? That there is intrinsic entity within all of the natural systems. And that in my language, we call them Yuria, that our mountains are spirits, that there are spirits that are attached to what in the Western sense we describe as ecosystems. And I grew up seeing my elders be in communication with these spirits, be in not just a telling of what we are going to do as humans to the land, but in a negotiation with these spirits, sort of asking if it's okay, looking for signs if it's okay, if we were to do any kind of major decision making that would affect that area. I also grew up with the knowledge that we lived in harmony with nature, that there wasn't the sense that for us to thrive, we needed to subjugate or change or, alter the very being of these natural systems. And I think what came through for me very clearly was that when we talked about interdependence in the Tibetan Buddhist context, which is the religion and culture I grew up in, that there was an actual embodiment of the precept of interdependence. It wasn't just something that we meditated on and then left behind, right? It actually was a value that was embodied in our community and our society. And a lot of that, would manifest in very simple ways for a child that you're absorbing. So, one thing is that you could never point your finger at anything. You had to use all four fingers as a sign of respect, even if there was a tree, sentient or non-sentient, right? How we define sentience. Another was that in the West, especially of where I come from, Sikkim, which is this beautiful landscape behind me, my home landscape, we couldn't just say the name of a species. So for example, if I said bear, I couldn't just say dom, which is the actual translation of bear. I would have to say akudom, which means uncle bear, right? So in every sense of my upbringing as a child, I was raised with this idea that interdependence is something we embody in real terms, not just something that we aspire to get towards or a philosophy that influences our thinking. It was very much our body embodies what this concept means. And I think about so much that has been lost in the last 40 years in my community. And I think at the heart of it is this understanding that if nature is alive, then what we are doing to nature in the pursuit of development in particular is obviously ethically egregious, right? It's a problem. Like the fact that we're subjugating a living entity. And I think this is one of the first things that I think of when I think about how we stand in some sense, to me, what Indigenous people do in regards to the mainstream environmentalism is, I feel like we are in many ways the last standing body of ethics, that are saying, hold on, if the problem is caused by neoliberalism, if the problem is caused by unchecked capitalism and globalization, and you think the solution is not to stop these things, hold on a minute. Right, we really have to go back and look at the root cause of what is driving ecological and climate loss, the crisis, right? We're at a point of crisis. And if we are not talking about economic systems that have driven them, then we've sort of lost the plot. And I feel like the other area where, my community in particular, and I have to say more than my community, the communities in the north, in Sikkim, the Lepcha community, who are indigenous to Sikkim, I've grown up seeing them put their bodies on the line, literally. And I don't mean with a lot of florid language that I see on Twitter. I mean, literally. They're not on Twitter, right? They're literally out there protesting and doing hunger strikes and taking risks because the police are going to be brutal, right? And I see this all over the world. I mean, we see this all over Latin and Central America. We see this all over the Americas. We see this here on Turtle Island. I see this north in Wisconsin. And so for me, I think Lyla mentioned that this is a time of hope and that there is a lot of hope in the coming generation. I also see a lot of hope in the coming together of different Indigenous leaders and Indigenous communities, because what I'm seeing right now is the recognition of a planetary Indigenous framework that on resilience, where we don't see a difference between spiritual, community, and planetary resilience. It is one and the same thing. You want to call it well-being, you want to call it whatever the term might be, you want to call it. None of us who are raised in this way that is, I would say, cosmically intact in these cultures have shied away from this understanding that spiritual, community, and planetary resilience are one and the same thing. And I think that may be the most important lesson I have learned from my community, which is the Bhutia community in Sikkim. And we are, I suppose, an Indo-Tibetan, we are considered a tribe, and we're Indo-Tibetan in the Himalayas. And I just want to say also that, I have traveled all over the world in my work, and I've lived a lot in America, and especially have been in Wisconsin for the last 4 years. And for me, there is this concept of interdependence. I see it everywhere. On Turtle Island, what I hear most commonly is the concept of kinship. And to me, when it is described, it is so beautiful and so perfect, because it is exactly the description that I would use for interdependence and that my elders would use for interdependence. And one of the places where I find the greatest hope is how much advice and care I receive from elders in the north. And here in Dejop, which is, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, which is Ho-Chunk land. And it seems to me that maybe the other thing that is completely different from mainstream environmentalism is that we are raised to understand and embrace people as being part of nature. We don't see nature and humans being two separate things. Human beings are a part of nature. We could not survive, we can't survive 9 minutes without oxygen. That oxygen does not come from us, right? It comes from nature. And so this idea that nature is something that is completely a separate entity to be protected, to be turned pristine, right? Virginal forests. I mean, all of the language we do where we are othering nature, as opposed to saying that this is part of us or we are part of it, more rather. I think that is also something that I really take to heart, not only something I learned in my community, but I've learned from elders here in Wisconsin and elsewhere as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to pass the same question now to Dr. Celidwen. So how does your community tend to view their role as caretakers of the earth, and how does this differ from mainstream environmentalism?
I was born and raised in El Paraíso Cuelha, which translates into English as the wonderland of flowing waters, in the hearts of the cloud forest of Chiapas. This specific kind of mesophilic forest is the last remnants of its kind in North America and threatened to extinction by 2050 due to the climate emergency. So this heart that I remember being 3/4 forest, coffee beans, and maize, corn, our sacred staple. And the last remnant quarter, dreams. I remember during the day, Cuelha was inundated with a scent of moistened glory, effervescent dynamism. It was active, expansive. And the nighttime was more subtle, more soothing, more opening to the mysterious. And it was the time in which we would gather around my elders to listen to our stories. And all of these stories were about balance. I always sort of knew that our lineage of ancestors, and I said earlier in my beginning of the talk, that our ancestor includes, of course, our ancestors of lands and waters and skies, and ancestors that are in the past, but also that are yet to come. They are all here orienting our action. So I always felt they have this gift of conciliation, the effervescence and the soothing calm. There is space of that swaying. Just by observing the wisdom of our Mother Earth. So in their ways, there was always space for the rosy-fingered dawn, as well as the lightning and the storms. And they were all medicine people. So medicine from the heart, but from the heart of Mother Earth. This is a medicine that is finding the understanding of balance from the wisdom of our elder trees and the chants of the wind, the whims of seasons breaks, or the gossip of the birds. So it's a way of living that tends to the whole of Mother Earth with the kindest care, a reverential care that sees all as our kin, a way of relating that I call kin relationality. Because the whole of the earth is made literally of our ancestors, is the dwelling, the living dwelling of our ancestors. So when we relate to this sacredness or divinity, of life, we realize that our senses start becoming porous. They become fluid and elemental. We become water. We become earth and fire and wind. And then we can dive deep into the pitch blackness of the soil and open to the vast brightness of the skies. And learn within those spaces what is the language of care, a language of responsibility, of reciprocity, of knowing that my presence is because presence of all others. And because of that, I am to be in service of all others. So this way of being in the world is a way that sees that sacred spark in everything that is. Sentience or consciousness is in everything that is, and it is made out of relationships. We are because the others are. So that opens us to not only welcoming, but to become humble and vulnerable. And knowing that there is no such thing as hope, as expecting something suddenly happening, that everything's going to be okay and that will change things back into a sense of balance. But rather that there is a commitment to that responsibility of service, because we are serving our ancestors right now. With each of our breaths, each of our actions are made of our ancestors. So suddenly, from living within that space, we can create a place of being that is not about extraction and appropriating or capitalizing or commodifying our world and relationships and kin, but rather as nourishing the very soils in which everything can sprout.
Lyla, I think you helped, or I think you wrote this question. So I will invite you to answer the same. How does your community tend to view their role as caretakers of the earth? And how does this differ from mainstream environmentalism?
First of all, I just want to thank the previous sisters. Thank you so much for all that you carry. I'm honored to sit beside you. Honored to sit with all of you. So the biggest difference that I'm thinking about these days is how mainstream environmentalism is about protecting nature and reserving nature and conserving nature and extracting humans out of the equation, because humans are bad. But in a lot of indigenous worldviews, humans are good, and they are, again, imbued with divine purpose, and they are nature. And so to strip nature of humanity, when equipped with the proper software, actually renders nature worse off than if we were there. So let me give an example. The chestnut used to be the primary staple food for native nations in the East, all the way from Maine down to Georgia. And the chestnuts were maintained. We have some fossilized pollen evidence that shows that human tended chestnut groves over 3,000 years old. That one particularly is in Kentucky. And around 1830, the chestnut blight, the fungus, it wiped out about 98% of all the American chestnuts. And there are almost no American chestnuts left on the planet. And so this is because they removed the stewards of the chestnuts. So the chestnut not only supported the economy and the vitality and the life force of all these indigenous nations from north to south along the eastern side of the US, it also supported all kinds of animal and plant communities too. And so this was a non-human centric food system in the sense that augmenting the base of the chestnuts augmented the entire food web. So by tending to these chestnuts, they supported the life around them. When you remove the human being, when you remove the indigenous peoples, which also about 98% of them were wiped out, the system collapsed. So that's just an example of how the human hand is actually, when equipped with the proper values and the proper knowledge, can actually be a great asset to the earth. And I would argue that the earth needs us. The earth needs us front and center with our sleeves rolled up, doing our small part, which can sometimes be a very big part in the ecological functioning of a ecosystem. So the way that they would take care of these chestnuts is they would space them properly. You have to space them, and that does a few things. Number one, it prevents the forest from becoming a thicket or collapsing and having like a lot of chestnuts close together, or just a lot of trees in general. And when you space the chestnut trees and you burn in between in the meadows, burning is one of our most important management tools, and we've been doing it for thousands of years. In that same fossilized pollen record, they found fossilized charcoal for 3,000 years straight, which indicates, and it just showed up all of a sudden. For 7,000 years prior, there was no chestnut, there was no hickory nut, there was no walnut, there was no fossilized charcoal, there was no fire. And all of a sudden, all those things came together in the record and sustained for 3,000 years, indicating this was an anthropogenic food forest. So when you burn between the chestnuts, you are keeping the meadows open for deer and other herbivores. Even bison were as far east as Pennsylvania back in the day. And that's what they always say, the diaries of the early colonists. Oh, it looks like a splendid park. It looks like a park, or they would say the park-like nature of the land, because they were coming upon a very beautiful park that was crafted and tended and sculpted by human hands. So when the chestnut trees are spread out, they have enough sunlight, nutrients, water. And when they're all packed together and the meadows collapse into thickets of brush and what we see today here in the East, they're all fighting for limited soil, nutrients, water, and sunlight. And you have a lot of sick trees and their immune systems are compromised. Whereas if you give them space to have their own little spot, they're really strong, healthy trees. And so that prevents disease from taking over. You also have the diseases, it's harder for the disease to travel because things are spaced properly, 13 trees per acre, very spaced out. That's just one example of like there's a good example of in California, the Amamutsun Nation, they wanted to thin the Douglas fir. This is in the Santa Cruz area, California. They said, man, there's too much Doug fir. It's choking out the system. And the Sierra Club said, no, don't cut down the trees. They're sacred, which is beautiful. I'm not downplaying that. That's a good intention, but they don't understand that the earth needs to be gardened just like a garden. You don't have a bunch of carrots growing all bunched together, because then you'll have a bunch of tiny weird carrots. You need the carrots to be spaced a few inches, right? That's why we space stuff in our gardens. And so they didn't allow them to thin out some of the Doug firs, and the whole system, we believe, suffers for it. You need a healthy balance of meadow and forest, not just thickets. And in a roundabout way that does sequester as much carbon, because you have all this biodiversity, you have all these ungulates, these herbivores walking around, which are walking balls of carbon. And it's just a much healthier system. So yeah, I just think that modern environmentalism views humans as a pest, whereas indigenous environmentalism regards us as a necessary piece of the puzzle, as well as a keystone species to uphold our responsibility, our sacred responsibility as five-fingered beings. We have a role in that forest. We were put there for a reason. When equipped with the proper software, we could be an asset.
Beautiful. Thank you to each of you. In deference to time, I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. I'm gonna forego Q&A. So apologies if you've submitted any questions, but I'm gonna use the rest of the time with our panelists before we turn it over to Christina, who will close us. And I'd like to offer each of you time. If there's anything you would like to share, closing remarks, invitation, anything, you have here 150-ish people, many of us from the Midwest and from faith backgrounds. I would guess most are Christian, but also from different faith traditions. And if there's anything you would like to share, I would invite you to share that. And then we'll close out with Christina. And yeah, so same pathway. I'll pass it to Dekila first.
Thank you. Thinking about the community that's here, I think the first thing I would say is just let us remember that we're the largest stakeholder group on the planet. Over 80% of the human population subscribes to a faith. We run over 50% of all schools. We are collectively the third largest investor group in the planet. Collectively, we own over 8% of all habitable land. So the importance for me of what Faith in Place is doing, why I created the LOCA initiative, why I work so closely with different faith communities and religious institutions is because when we come together collectively, faith can move mountains, right? And in our case, that is literal. I think it's really important that we remember that we are that the planet is a closed system. That means atmosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, right? Like you imagine the earth, you imagine the water, you imagine our atmosphere. It's a closed system. We are born here, we live here, we thrive here, we die here, and then we recycle into one another. So it's really important that we don't other one another and we don't see, living and non-living things as other than us, right? Because we're constantly recycling into one another. That is the totality of our existence. So if nature falls apart and if nature collapses, we collapse very obviously. And therefore, it's really important that we do everything we can to protect nature, because by protecting nature, we're protecting ourselves. right? This interdependence means that our well-being and nature's well-being is completely, inextricably interconnected. For those of you who are really, working on minimizing your own footprint, I really applaud you. I'm so grateful. I think please consider your advocacy as well, not just your footprint, but also speaking up. We know that talking about climate change and normalizing it is one of the most important tools we can use, right? Just to get momentum going on climate action. And then the last thing I'd say is really lean into the fact that faiths use and have developed a language of hope. We're in a moment that I think is just opening up into the realization of eco-anxiety and climate distress. We are in emotional and mental anguish and trauma. And I think we need faith leaders to really ramp up their efforts in addressing those issues in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Dekila. And I will pass it to Dr. Celidwen.
I bring back this spiral time of the past into the present, the future into the present, and all orienting our action right now to what Sister Dekila just said about faith moves mountains, and then just tweaking it a little bit in that faith are the mountains, that it is by that heart that we will regain the insight of relationality, of responsibility, reverence. And yes, we pay attention and all we hear is urgency. The challenges are innumerable. But then again, the opportunities are infinite. This balance, this learning how to sway the grief, but also the compassion. We hold awe as we hold horror. And the creation brings the possibility of transition from othering into belonging. So as I was bringing this ancestral wisdom that we are ourselves soil and we are therefore porous, we can be that food for others to enable a possibility of growth and re-emergence that nourishes a new way of being, that quenches those cracked soils of hopelessness and separation, isolation, anxiety into safety and action and meaning and transformation, so that we can then become open, become the bridges that open the places for all others to emerge.
Thank you. Lyla?
Would you mind restating the question, please?
Yeah, of course. I was just inviting if there's any closing remarks, any closing thoughts you would like to share before we close out, in lieu of the many questions we didn't get to.
Yeah, that's how it is, eh? You give Native people an inch, they take a mile. But that's how it is. It's like time is different. And visiting is different. I think I'd just like to say that I love you all and I believe in the Creator. And I believe in the Creator's ability to show us things that are bigger than we can understand. And I believe that the Creator is love. And I believe that this being loves us unconditionally. And that whatever we think we've done that is unforgivable or imperfect or despicable is deeply forgiven by the Creator, to the extent that or to the end that we can be set free to serve him once again, him or her or it or they. And I think that each and every one of us here is sacred and precious, and that each of us has been given a gift or gifts to leverage our role as warriors on the earth, and that our task is to find our gift or our gifts and to give them freely to a world in need. And I believe in each of our power collectively when we all give together to make a huge change. And I believe in the one word prayer. It's a very simple prayer that I was taught. And it goes like this: help. You know, that was the prayer I was taught. Help is an open-ended prayer. You're not really asking for any certain type of help. You're just asking for help. And when you open up that prayer 180 degrees to just be whatever it needs to be, the Creator can do so much with that. And so I make that prayer with you all today. It's like, help, help us, Creator, in whatever way that we could be useful in these times, in whatever way you could help us, guide us, help us. Let us be open to the help that wants to come. And let us unlimit the Creator's vastness. Open the Creator's vastness and unlimit it to come rushing into our lives in ways we could scarcely imagine. That is my prayer. I love the Creator. I pray that when I die, that's the message that's left behind, is that I loved the Creator and that I gave myself to him. And that's the most important thing I want to say. And I love you all too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyla and Dr. Celidwen and Dekila. I'm not sure if you've looked at the chat, but so many people are sharing their gratitude for everything that you shared. So many would like to listen for 5 more hours, but we will not do that to you. But thank you so much for being with us on Indigenous Peoples Day and sharing just the depth and breadth of wisdom that I see is connecting with our audience in really beautiful ways. So thank you to each of you, and for all of your work outside of this. I think Christina will share this when she closes, but just as a reminder to our audience, each of our 3 panelists have lots of writings and practices and speeches. So if you would like to learn more, we have their websites and some of those linked on our resource page, so you can continue learning. And with that, thank you to each of you, and I will turn it over to Christina, who will close us out for our session.
Thank you, Elena. I'm Christina Glazer, and I'm Faith in Places Indiana Policy Coordinator. And I'm honored to have this opportunity to close out this session with you. A really big thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We so much appreciate the insights and the stories you have shared. Today's session has been dedicated to exploring ways to create a more inclusive and intersectional environmental movement. As we conclude this session, we invite everyone to work with us in shifting the dominant narratives in both the environmental and religious spaces, broadening our horizons and embracing diversity of thought and perspective. I would love to hear what this panel has stirred up in you. If you would be willing to share 1 or 2 words describing how you're feeling, we invite you to do so in the chat now. I read touched, gratitude, love, kin-centered, moved, uplifted, thankfulness, grateful, open, enlightened, awed, connected, unity. Thank you so much for everyone who's sharing here with how this session has touched you. We also, as Elena already said, we want to invite you to continue exploring the resources from our panelists, and you will get links for them in the chat, and they will be sent to you in the follow-up to the Green Team Summit. I would also like to express my gratitude for the sponsors who made today's session possible. Thank you again to our lead sponsor, Presbytery of Chicago, the sponsor of the day, Illinois Environmental Council, and our session sponsor, ComEd. Also, our Oak level sponsors, Kollel, Jewish Renewal Center, Citizens Utility Board, Climate Reality, and Collective Resource. They all helped make today's session possible. Thank you. Before we conclude, I would like to share a quote from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a French Jesuit priest, a scientist, a paleontologist, a theologian, philosopher, and teacher. Here's what he said: someday, after we have mastered the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. Then, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. I'd love to see this fire of love and reverence in action in our work together, our work for justice that embraces the sacredness of Earth with all its elements and all of its beings. In closing, I want to extend my gratitude to each one of you for being here with us today and remind you of today's session that will happen tonight. It will commence at 5:30 CT, 6:30 ET. It will be dedicated to sharing information about how the federal government is providing more inclusive funding that houses of worship can take advantage of to reduce their energy usage and transition to renewables. We hope to see you there. Have a great afternoon, everyone.